If you could sit down, please, we'll get started. One thing to announce is after this discussion, there will be boxed lunches available in the forum here, and it's a real great way to network with people and get a good bite to eat.
All right, well, here we go. Last but definitely not least is Dan, another friend. And Dan is a founder, entrepreneur, much the same, wow, this slide is really great, in much the same manner that I am. His skill set when he was in these companies was as a VP of operations, a VP of manufacturing, and then in some of the companies as CEO. And a couple of the companies are pretty legendary companies in Silicon Valley. Synertech and VLSI Logic were companies in the semiconductor industry that Dan founded. Both of them very successful companies. VLSI Logic, actually, I was a customer. Ascend was a customer. I kept trying, by the way, to get things for free. Yeah, I'd always try to make them a deal to get 3 things for the price of 1. It actually never worked. And then he went on and as an investor and as a CEO did, what's the name of it? Santa Cruzing, which was a surfboard company, which is kind of neat, and Coastal Inns of California, which was what it sounds like. It was a hotel chain in California. So he's got a lot of experience as an entrepreneur. And I asked Dan if he wouldn't mind talking about, well, you've heard about sunflower innovation from me. You heard about money from Joe, and now you're going to hear about execution. How do you implement from Dan?
Testing. Is it working? Great, thank you. I'm Dan Floyd, and like Rob said, I'm going to go through the implementation and execution of business ideas. My background, as Rob said, is I started off with a company called Synertech, which is in the semiconductor business. A group of 4 of us started that. We sold it to Honeywell, and we started VLSI Technology, which we took public in 1983. Then I got doing other types of turnaround businesses. Microtest was a manufacturing company and test equipment business. AWI was an assembly company and what they called surface mount technology. I dabbled in retail, which is a company called Santa Cruz, which had 2 surf shops in Santa Cruz. I helped fund the fellow initially, and we bought another surf shop. And then a service business, California Administration Services, which is a insurance company in California that services police and firefighters. And they currently insure 60,000 police and firefighters in California. That company started with an investment of $30,000. Very interesting story. And we did Coastal Inns of Distinction, which was a series of 5 boutique hotels along the coast of California from Half Moon Bay to Capitola and Santa Cruz. And then a company called Omni Technology, which was a burn-in and test company, very similar to Microtest. What we're going to cover today is the process. And Rob's already gone through determining pedals. We're going to go through these different steps, and then you've heard Joe's presentation on putting together a financial plan, so I'm going to fill in the middle. But before I do that, I want to talk about the pedal. You know, Rob's talked about it as being for a business, a company, or products. But one of the things you can do with the pedal process is look at the different organizations within your company, the different groups, and see what core competencies they have and make sure it fits the overall core competency of your business, because you can run into some major conflicts between organizational competencies. And you really have to be careful when you're building a company that everything plays together. And it's super critical if you go into a company that's having problems and you're trying to do a turnaround, because usually you'll find out that there's 1 or 2 groups in there that's totally out of sync with the objectives of the company, and they have to be weeded out really fast. The first thing is putting together a team, which I call advanced marketing and technology. And this is the group that's going to put together potential users of your core competency and decide questions to ask those potential users before you do a walkabout. Now, it can be 1, 3, 5 members, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. We had one company where we were doing business in Iran, and one of the members of our team was somebody that was doing political work, because you had to be able to work in the political system of the country. Same thing happened with a business we were doing in Japan at one time. So depending on the kind of questions you want and what your core competency is, depends on what the composition of this team is. The walkabout is what Rob talked about, where you send the teams out into the field and you visit potential users of your core competency. You ask questions related to the potential need for your core competency. And this can be, whether they want to use your technology, whether they can use it, whether you can educate them as to what your technology is and how they could use it, what trends are in the market, lots of questions like that. And I got 2 examples. When we started VLSI, we sent the teams out to visit a company called Evans and Sutherland Computer Corporation. And they made flight simulators, and the electronics for the flight simulators was probably the width of the stage and 10 or 12 feet high, stuffed with electronics. It probably cost $5 or $10 million to build that box that ran a flight simulator. Well, we had design tools that would allow them to integrate everything that was in that box and put it into something smaller than this. And they were so interested in what we were doing that Dave Evans, who was the founder of Evans and Sutherland, went to Hambrick and Quist, who was a venture capital firm, and told them they needed to invest in us. So that's how we got the initial investment, was a referral from a walkabout. The second example we ran into was after we started a company of VLSI technology, our core competency was high density, low power memories. And one of the companies we visited was Mattel, because we had done business with them before. They recognized us and our team and our capability, and they gave us a purchase order on the spot for $19 million to develop a product for them, which we didn't have. The same example that Rob had. We didn't even have the product yet, but we were going to design it and develop it. They also, though, the most important part, they gave us a letter of credit to back up the purchase order, which is essentially unheard of because they're putting their credit on the line for us. And so that saved us about $4 million in cash flow. We were able to pull down against the letter of credit as soon as we made the product. We didn't have the delay of receivables. And it's the kind of thing that can happen if you have a good story and go out to potential users. Once you get all this data that you're from your potential users, you get all your email teams back together again, review the answers to the questions and other pertinent information you might have picked up by talking to these people. You look for trends and product ideas. You synthesize a list of potential products and key customers, and you make a presentation to the board of directors as to what you found. The team develops a board presentation, you present it to the board. The purpose is to educate the board on the opportunities and obtain approval to proceed and discuss funding options. That's pretty critical because your board has to be on board, sort of play on word, of what you're doing. And they normally hold the purse strings. They tell you what you can and can't do. Once you get board approval, you create a design team to design the products. To do that, you have to go back and visit people who you've met on your walkabout or who are potential customers to fine-tune product features and bring back purchase orders if you can get them. Like Mattel was an example, but it happened before this stage. But when we did go visit Mattel the second time, they told us they wanted this high-density memory, but we went back to purchase them. They said, well, we got one little hook in this thing, and that is we don't want it in a typical package. We want it on a board. And if you're familiar with how computers and everything are built, they're with circuit boards. Well, Mattel wanted their chip put on a board that they were going to put into a system. And the technology didn't exist for that. And again, they asked if we could do it, and we said, oh yeah, we can do anything you want. So we brought that back as a new product idea. Another one was a company called AWI, which I was involved in, which did surface mount technology. If you're familiar with how computers and other instrumentation is built, they put the circuit board in, they put them into the equipment one way or another. Well, surface mount is when they mount it directly onto either the case, like the iPads or iPhones, those kind of products have surface mount technology. They're very, very small components that you've attached to the case and eliminates the circuit board. Well, AWI back in 1985 found a customer called Convergent Technologies who had built an iPad equivalent, and they needed the surface mount technology to be able to build that product, and it didn't exist anywhere. We had the technology, but we didn't have all the equipment, so they gave us a purchase order for their product, plus they guaranteed the equipment leases. So they helped fund the company by guaranteeing equipment leases. Unfortunately, the product didn't work out for them, but it helped AWI substantially. Once you get the product developed, you do it for what I call excellence and not perfection. If you try to make a perfect product, you're never going to get a product or a service. What you want to do is do the best you can and over time refine it. That's why you see Microsoft, for example, come out with these changes seems like every 2 days they do another change and an enhancement of a product, because they're going for excellence on a product and not perfection. They get perfection over time. That's a little bit different than Apple, because Apple went the other direction, and I think they try to make everything perfect. They still come out with changes, but not to the extent that Microsoft does. Once you end up with a product and customers, you have to develop goals. And Rob has a terminology, a book about these big, hairy goals. You want to put together big goals so you get your team motivated. And the goals should be in the areas of market penetration, end user penetration, product pricing and value proposition, and then developing a financial plan, which was Joe's presentation. But let me give you an example how not to do this. The value proposition part, I told you about Evans and Sutherland having this huge box that we ended up shrinking down to something that size. We came from the semiconductor business, which is a business which is a low margin business. If you make 40% margin, you're doing pretty good. And so we were pricing product along that way. And we had very new design tools, something that came out of Caltech and Xerox research. We refined into design tools where you could design chips. You could take this thing and distill it down to a small number of circuits. Well, this box that Evans and Sutherland had was probably $5 or $10 million worth of electronics. We made that box, and we charged them the design cost, which was probably about $50,000, and then we sold them chips, probably $5 or $10 a piece. If we'd have used Rob's approach, we would have gone in there and probably sold them the package for $2.5 million. So we left a lot of money sitting on the table because we didn't understand the value proposition part of the business. And that's one of the things that's wrong with the semiconductor industry. Right now, it's sort of like a steel mill. They just crank out stuff when you have certain low-level pricing. And it's really not the way things should be done, because if you're really saving a customer money, you should be getting something in return for that. So it's something you really need to keep in mind when you develop your value proposition about how do you charge the customer for what you do. And you don't get pulled into how it's done traditionally. You have to think outside the box. Like Rob had a great example of that.